Welcome to another episode of the Two Heads podcast with me, Lorna Hackett, and Michael Mansfield QC. Now, this episode is dedicated to access to justice. We discuss the erosion of access to justice, human rights cases, and judicial review, as well as the crisis facing the criminal bar in England and Wales. We hope you enjoy the show.
What we were talking about, which was crime and punishment. We've got to the punishment bit, and now we're going to deal with or try to address the sort of, because we're intimately involved in it as professionals, but the way in which access to justice, because there's no point in having all these conventions and treaties and bills of rights if you can't do anything about any of them, which means the ordinary citizens got to be empowered, which means they've got to be able to recognize access to justice, which they can walk along without falling over and being found that they haven't got the resources. Now, the problem now is, over the last few years, is resources, which you know all about.
Yeah, and in real terms, in England and Wales, the rates for legal aid have not, certainly in criminal cases, have not increased for 25 years. That's the hourly rate. And huge numbers of barristers are leaving the profession. And while that might mean that solicitors are rubbing their hands together with glee, that doesn't necessarily actually plug the hole.
Well, solicitors are leaving as well, or at least they're not doing crime because it doesn't pay.
Yeah.
A useful phrase.
It is. But then, and also, I mean, I suppose following the last 2 years, everybody really is reevaluating the way that they live, the way that they work, the choices that they make in life, what if they're happy in what they do, and they're looking at well-being. And are they happy in the job that they're doing? Well, how can you say as a criminal barrister that you have a good work-life balance, or that you're properly remunerated, or that you are valued? Or that you can see a sort of career progression for the rest of your days. Let's say you're 2 years qualified and I think the figures on average are that you earn £12,000 a year for the first 3 years of qualification. If we want a diverse legal profession, we want diversity at the bar, at the junior end particularly, then as well as the senior end. But how can anybody survive on, let's say in central London, for £12,000 a year for 3 years? That wouldn't even pay your gas bill at current rates.
Yeah, because I mean the overall percentages appear to be, this is going back over the last 5-6 years, and it wasn't just a Conservative government that started to cut away at legal aid. Labour government did the same. There have been attacks on lawyers by the Labour government. Tony Blair did it and kind of blamed the criminal bar for obstructing justice. And along comes, the present Home Secretary, Priti Patel, and the Prime Minister talking about, again, lawyers as if they are in any way responsible for the level of immigration, the level of crime and all the rest of it. So this constant attack on lawyers, which allows them to then at the same time reduce the amount of money spent, given what trillions they're spending on PPE that doesn't work. It's a totally ludicrous situation. So I think we would both say that at the moment there is a crisis within, I can only really authoritatively speak about criminal legal aid. I think there is a real dearth of a possibility of people getting due access to the courts as well as being properly represented by a range of people, because the diversity is slowly going, because people just cannot afford to survive.
And I saw something I think it was on Twitter. Somebody had said people are leaving the criminal bar if they can, which means that they're desperate to get out, but they might not have an alternative opportunity. And of course, it's quite difficult, I think, for a lot of lawyers to change specialism once they've been doing it for a while. People get very used to what they're doing. People are scared to try something else. They feel that they're going to have to be starting again from the bottom of the ladder. And that creates a situation in which they feel completely trapped in what they're doing. So the reality is, it would be we go back to the funding situation, don't we? There needs to be a big cash injection to secure the justice system, which used to be the envy of the world.
And I think I just want to expand it a bit, because as you're speaking, I'm thinking it's not just a question of the profession and participation by the profession. It is, in fact, a several-pronged attack on law as an institution, because you've got heavy criticism of the judiciary by politicians, particularly when Lady Hale was at the helm in the Supreme Court. They thought she was interfering. All that business over the prorogation of Parliament and so on by Boris Johnson, and really suddenly the rule of law goes, another thing that goes out of the window along with truth. So, it's a belief that you can break that rule as well as all the other ones that are being broken. So the rule of law doesn't get upheld in that way at all. And there's an attack on the ability to protest. There's an attack on the legal profession, who are seen as rogues, some of them anyway. And so therefore you have a situation in which there's a full-scale attack on rights. They want to rewrite the Human Rights Act. Goodness knows what they think is the British right to life as opposed to the European right to life. Anyway, they're going to rewrite the bill, so they say. At the same time, I don't know how much this is appreciated, there's a further attack on, I call it the rule of law as opposed to anything else, is that the facility to judicially review government decisions, not government policy, but government decisions, that's really what judicial review is supposed to be about, is being curtailed and has been already curtailed. So it's difficult for people, there's no funding that's going to be available if somebody wants to challenge a decision, and that you have to go about it through the public, subscribing through crowdfunding or whatever. And they're making it, you have to do it within a certain time, which they're making very difficult indeed. You have to have a certain standing, which they're making very difficult indeed. They're making everything, all the conditions for doing it, extremely difficult. So the average person who I started with, somebody, let's take somebody who's a single parent with 3 kids and a dog, living in one room, they're hardly going to be contemplating judicial review of a decision which affects them. It may not just be central government, it could be local government or whatever, who are committing these serious errors that affect their lives. What can you do about it? Unless you've got a campaign, unless you've got a law centre, unless you've got a firm of lawyers who are prepared to do it, either pro bono or they can raise the funds. Now, all of that, you have to see all of that together, that panoply of attack on citizens' rights of access to law at all has been seriously devalued over the last 25 years. So no, the last 25 years I've been practicing, and same for you. So I think the public are slowly waking up to how serious it is. And I would hope that a future regime may consider, reconsider the situation that we're all placed in. Because it's not just the profession, that's all I'm trying to say, not just the profession. All of us are affected by the fact that enforcing our rights, and then of course we come out of Europe. That doesn't mean to say you come out of the European Court. There are different issues, but there is this animosity, this hostile environment we've got to create. And so it's, I think it's a very, it's a situation in which we all together have to be rethinking how we're going to construct. So it's not just even the prison regimes, it's the regime across the board, how we're going to approach the question and the value we attach to, rights that we do think are fundamental. That's why they're called fundamental rights. That's why they're in the convention in the first place. So it seems to me that that's, when you get an attack on that, then, we're in serious trouble, in my view. Yeah. So.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, people might think, well, it's all right for 2 lawyers to sit here and say and bleat on about remuneration for lawyers, but it's actually far more fundamental than that.
Yeah.
I mean, nobody particularly cares about lawyers in the way, for example, that they care about the NHS. People don't think legal aid is really at the bottom of the pile in terms of the public perception of how important sort of post-war provisions for citizens were. But if you have a situation, we have to look at it holistically, don't we? Because if the justice system is failing defendants, it's also probably failing victims too, because if you have a situation which is grossly underfunded, huge delays in proceedings coming to trial, well, that's not doing the victims any good either, because they're not getting justice. So it's the whole system that is fundamentally crumbling, really, rather than just, you know, what we as lawyers would perceive to be problems and things that are undermining the system as we view it as lawyers, I think.
I mean, legal welfare was seen, I mean, again, it's a sort of age issue, I suppose, that the post-war Clement Attlee vision of a Labour government which had in mind, you know, it's almost as though it's a dirty word, a welfare state. It had a state in which the welfare of everybody was being considered on the housing front, the employment front, on the rights front, on the criminal justice front. It's being considered, as you just said, holistically. Yeah. And there was a real possibility, and of course I came in on the back of that a bit. I mean, I started practicing, dear, 67. So it was underway by then, but it was in the 50s where this was all being embedded. And slowly but surely, it's become, you know, the nanny state. So we've got to get rid of all that, and been attacked on all fronts. So one of the pillars of the welfare state was the National Health Service. And so was the legal welfare. But legal welfare has been regarded as a poor relation, has been hived off, and has ended up in a backward. And that's what's happening to the NHS right now. Well, sorry, it happened before COVID, was a deconstruct of the national health system. So that when COVID comes along, it's already impoverished. It already hasn't got the resources it should have had to withstand. So we get a situation in which the Prime Minister is saying, well, don't get COVID because you're putting too much trouble on the NHS and they haven't got the resources. Wait a minute. You know, that shouldn't be the case. I'm not blaming the NHS, but I am blaming governments. Not just this government, but ones before. You have to be providing. That's the value of the state in the first place, saying, as they did in 1945, they actually sat down and got a different blueprint. And I would recommend to anybody who hasn't seen it. I'm not a member of the Labour Party, so I'm not trying to promote the Labour Party beyond any other. All I'm saying is that the Attlee speech in the Central Hall, Westminster in 1945, which is on film, and I saw it for the first time, black and white film, it is amazing. Mm-hmm. Here he is in the ashes, because London had been bombed to smithereens by then. I've got a little bit of one of the bombs at home. And my brother went round collecting the pieces. And so, I mean, I do sort of have a memory of the war. So it means something to me. And it means to me that somebody in those very dark days, somebody who was never expected would rise to that. Everybody thought it'd be Winston. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't Winston. Very interesting. The public said, no, great during the war, but not now. We want somebody who can reconstruct and revalue, which is what should be happening now. And instead of which, we have a very poor relation, a very poor shadow. Somebody's nowhere near, you know, the eminence of Churchill, who thinks he might be, but he's not. But that's what's needed at the moment. Somebody who can sit down and say the pandemic is actually, in one sense, worse than the Second World War. More people have died in the pandemic than they did in the First World War or the Second World War. More deaths through the pandemic. So this is a moment in which we need somebody to reconsider. And just, you know, one of the things I'm worried about is a further attack. What's the further attack in this context is central to the criminal justice system, and especially our system anyway, but others as well to some extent, is the jury. Ever since I began practice, there have been repeated attacks on the jury system. Yeah. Why? Because juries are members of the public. Mm-hmm. Why? Because juries provide a democratic dimension and aspect, and they bring that voice of common sense into the courtroom. And governments don't like that because they come up with verdicts they don't like. Whether it's to do with the sinking of battleships and so on. I mean, I can go through all the cases. There's a plaque at the Old Bailey which I sometimes ask jurors to go and have a look at, in memory of a trial of a man called Penn, who went on to become the founder of Pennsylvania. Quaker. Mm-hmm. They were put on trial as people who were basically guilty of sedition. But even during these early trials with jurors held out, as they did in that trial. And the judge was threatening them with jail if they didn't convict. They didn't convict. They were deprived of tobacco, all this kind of thing. And they still didn't convict. We need juries as a conscientious representatives of our existences. They're in there to ensure that arbitrary government, at the end of the day, does not, as it were, charge and bring to trial and convict, still less to send them wherever. Because they have this extra dimension in which they say, wait a minute, yes, we're looking at the evidence and we have to go by the evidence, but also the evidence points in more than one direction. And what is interesting is that attack on the jury system has continued. Mm-hmm. So whenever there's what they call a perverse verdict, one they don't like, they say, right, this is political, this is against our best principles. The latest one is the Colston statue. The defendants are all acquitted. And out come, usually, the usual sources. So it's going to be, I'm afraid to say, well, no, I'm not afraid to say, nearly always on the right-hand end of the spectrum, this is outrageous. And we got, Nigel Farage and all the rest of them bleating on about how, it's not right that they should. What next? We're going to get, what statues do you... This is not a divisive problem. This is what they focused on, it seems to me, is an absolutely important current issue. It affects, again, in a sense, it's echoed in the United States of America, the Black Lives Matter movement, and the fact that we should not be celebrating, even by, having statues if we don't want them in the middle of our streets, people who traded and made money out of lives. And the British did that almost more than any other nation. Other European nations, Belgium did it terribly in Africa. They all did it. But the Brits have done it better, as usual, than most, and got away with it to an extent. Except the, Wilberforce and the abolition of the slave trade, very important movement.
I'd just like to take a moment now to mention our amazing sponsors, Clio. As I'm the head of legal practice at a law firm, I'm always looking for ways to become more efficient, to save time on administrative tasks, and to keep track of client contact and matter management. And I have to say, Clio allows me to do all of this and so much more. At Hackett & Dabbs, we've been using Clio for about the last 18 months, and it has been absolutely brilliant. Importantly, it allows me to free up my valuable time to devote more to my clients and to the matters that I am so passionate about, like social justice. Clio offers really great customer service, flexible contracts, and a free trial so you can try out their software before you buy. There are also really nice people who are totally committed to achieving access to justice for all in society, including the most vulnerable. In short, I would recommend Clio to any lawyer or law firm. To see for yourself why I'm so pleased with them, visit www.clio.com/UK/2heads. That's www.clio.com/UK/2heads. And now, back to the show.
It comes back to Colston. Do we want statues of that kind? Do we want the Colston Hall? We are entitled as people, as communities, to say no. That doesn't mean you attack the statue, because you're then doing the very thing you're trying to say shouldn't happen. I think what should happen, don't throw it in the dock, that's too good. Take it out, put it in a museum, and then alongside it, you put this man with an arrow, in case somebody hasn't seen it. This man made his wealth and fortune and founded Bristol on the back of however many slaves he was responsible for transporting to Africa as commodities. And people go, oh, right. And then you show, there have been some brilliant films about how slaves were treated, appallingly, of course, really bad. And you know, you almost want to bring back capital punishment for the slave traders. But, you know, that's what education, history, and community is about. It's not about throwing a statue in the dock, in fact, although that made the point. But they had a historical rectitude about what they did. And so, and they had a defense in law as well. And those who didn't know that.
But that wasn't properly reported. And that's the thing, isn't it? Because we now survive on sound bites. And I think politicians read the sound bites and then come to these conclusions, and everybody's on Twitter or on other social media talking about these things without actually having taken the time to delve into the facts. You get these sound bites and it creates a sort of furore of falsehoods that distorts the reality. So I think a lot of people might have read about the Colston statue thinking that the jury had just, on a sort of moral crusade, had decided that it was the right thing for the defendants to have done and therefore acquitted. That wasn't the case at all. In law, they had defences and they were properly acquitted. And I don't think that was it just wasn't. It didn't come out because the news doesn't really focus on anything other than really the veneer of what's happened. And people then come to the wrong conclusions, and then we have a proliferation of fake law and fake news. And I know that the secret barrister has written a book called Fake Law, which is about this very point.
And that's why, you know, we get labelled because we might be involved in these trials. I've been involved, I wasn't involved in that one, but I've been involved in lots of others where there have been this kind of situation has cropped up. And so we're besmirched, well, I've been anyway, and perhaps you have been and not been. But I mean, we're called lawfare, it's called. That's what we're engaged in, lawfare, as if we are being made the enemy within, which of course they want us to be seen as the enemy within, when actually what we're trying to do is what the juries are trying to do, which is preserve an area within which the freedoms that people actually then espouse occasionally, the libertarian right espouse, suddenly they want the freedom of speech, which they're wanting to restrict in their protest bills, for their right to not have the vaccine or whatever it is. So, I mean, I think that it's this important battle that is not over by any means. And in fact, you know, the longer I tend to go on practicing, in a sense, the worse it gets and the more you need to fight it. Because the forces of darkness are amassing, make no mistake. But not just in the United Kingdom, they're all over the world. You know, so I don't think it's a losing battle because, you know, progress has been made over the centuries by the fact there's been a group of people, quite a large group, who collectively battled and kept shifting the frontier. So that even though it looks as though you're, you know, going backwards sometimes, in fact, you're making the ground that you make, you mustn't give it up. It's got to be protected, and then you have to wait while you're barraged, and then you move on again. At least that's how I look at it.
And talking about that, I know that there have been, you've been involved in quite a lot of cases in which it has taken not one, not two, but maybe three or more attempts to actually get justice. And I suppose with the Colston statue case, of course, they were acquitted at the first instance, but there have been lots of occasions, and I think with miscarriages of justice, where you have to go again and again and again. So sometimes, you know, justice takes a long time.
Oh, it has to sink in. It needs the oxygen of some publicity so that things can be investigated and so on. There were investigative series of programs put on by certain television companies, which were extremely useful in alerting the public to where things have gone wrong and alerting the system to where things have gone wrong. Yeah, but it's quite rare to win something of principle first time round. And so, you know, if they'd been convicted, I'm imagining that they would have gone on fighting it, but it takes years to do it. So, but what is interesting is that, you know, there was a time when, and it didn't happen in the Bristol case, when I was doing that kind of case where the judge would withdraw the defense. and say there's no defense to the jury. I mean, there's a case, a hijacking case that I did from some individuals from Iraq who were escaping from Saddam Hussein, and it was a convoluted story, but they ended up hijacking a plane which landed at Stansted. And the judge withdrew our defense, so we had difficulty. So we left it to the defendants to finish the case. Jury, fantastic. They convicted, but they said in very clear terms, these men should not be convicted because they're all escaping death penalties of their own. And they did get, I can't remember the total result, but anyway, we went on appeal, won the appeal. So in the end, they were acquitted. And it was regarded as improper that the defense had been withdrawn. So I think that provided people have the courage to stand up for the principles, in their case, principles they tried to espouse in Iraq but weren't able to, but all the way through here as well. So yeah, I have been in those cases, and I just feel that the mood has changed, that doesn't happen, and the judge in that case didn't withdraw it, although in the case of the Stansted, there's another Stansted case, which I was involved in the early stages, where they were protesting against the deportation of people abroad to regimes where they were not going to be safe. And people glued themselves to a plane and all the rest of it, or whatever they did. Can't remember all the details now. They got convicted first time round, but they didn't, on appeal, it was all quashed. So I think things are moving in the right direction, that people are understanding that this is not random vandalism. This is, on the whole, there's nearly always a rooted defence in law for what they are doing.
And in terms of some of the miscarriage of justice cases that you've been involved in, I'm always fascinated by the dogged determination of those who have been convicted wrongly and are the victims of miscarriages of justice. But also, I think as an interested fellow lawyer, how do you keep going with a case that has been refused on so many different occasions?
Weetabix. No.
One or two?
One or two, yes. 3. I think it is because, well, it's primarily because I began on the outside. I'm not born into a legal family. I have no history of that. You neither. Well, there you go. And secondly, I'm afraid it goes back to my mother. Particularly my mother, who defended herself against, I mean, it's silly, but it's not silly, because I've kept it in my mind all the way through, because she said, if this can happen to me, goodness knows what they're doing to everybody else. And I thought, I was only about 9 or something, or 8. She parked, allegedly, between the studs of a pedestrian crossing, as they were then, way back, by some local bobby, sort of. She was summoned to, Highgate Magistrates Court. She said, I'm not having this. This is a load of rubbish. I said, well, I don't know what she's talking about. And then she goes. She defends herself. She has a key witness.
You?
No. I said, Mum, shut up. No. She had my father, who was disabled, who was sitting inside the car. And the policeman hadn't noticed. So like the Perry Masons of this world, he came in, a couple of walking sticks, a very esteemed war record in the First World War. He hardly opened his mouth and she got acquitted. Because it was total rubbish. It was total rubbish. Now, that is a very middle-class kind of crime and all that. You say, well, it's only it isn't about parking any more than Partygate is about parties. It's about trust, it's about honesty, and it's about the fact that was it for my mother. Every time she saw, she called them blue bottles. There's another one over there now. And I thought, oh, right, well, this is something. So I got interested by the fact that my mother was wrongly accused about, and actually wasn't going to take it. She could have easily, because I don't know what my father said about it all, because he had a difficult job and he wasn't always there. So I don't know what he thought about it. But the fact was she stood up for what she wanted. And it lasted for the rest of her life and mine, right the way through. So I keep going because I think of my mum. And she would say, "You can't leave the job now." Something like that.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Well, I think what has been, for me anyway, a thoroughly incredible experience is to be able to just expose and discuss and a sort of discourse over the course of a few hours, issues that matter to both of us and that don't normally get canvassed in this way, because the media treat the public, the politicians treat the public as though they've got, I put it in a certain document, that they've got the attention span of a flea. Well, I don't think that, for obvious reasons. And I just think it's good to be able to luxuriate in a bit of time and actually expand on the things that really matter to us.
Mm-hmm. And of course, this podcast is called The Two Heads. And we talked about the fact that angels can dance on the top of a pinhead, and that there's a sort of modern day explanation, which is that we are talking about things that don't really matter while other things go on in the world, which we thought was quite funny, didn't we?
Yeah.
I haven't described it very well. But anyway.
No, I agree. Yes, thank you very much. To you.
Well, is there anything else I'd like to say? Yes, thank you very much. What a great experience.
Yeah,
I've really
it's been
enjoyed
really
it.
good.
Yeah, me too.